Hello, Brian from the channel, Brian here. Alright, here's my winter recap for 2022. Nothing compelled me to watch anything from the Oscars or last year, so we'll just skip to movies from the new year. And I saw nothing that I really loved, so usually I go from worst to best in these, but instead we're gonna go backwards, so here we go. I saw Ambulance! And I liked it. Remember when Michael Bay was like the internet's punching bag and supposedly gonna destroy cinema as we know it? Boy, were we dumb. I have never had the brutal hatred for Bay that other people seem to, even if some of his movies are terrible. But what separates Ambulance from something like Six Underground is a sense of realizing possibilities and then taking advantage of them. For what is basically one long chase scene, Bay has extracted so many different scenarios and plot beats out of what should be an incredibly limited framing device. Usually there's at least a little downtime in his movies where characters talk to each other, but here the momentum is kept so relentlessly high throughout, it's impressive even by Bay standards. Speaking of Bay standards, I shouldn't have to take the time to say this, but as it's not always a given with his films, the action is coherent, mostly visible, and I don't ever lose track of where characters are or where they were in the previous shot. Another possibility Bay took advantage of was casting Jake Gyllenhaal and forcing him to snort a mountain of cocaine in between every take. His performance is incredible, and I think the film would have been far less tolerable if it weren't for his chemistry with Yahya Abdul-Mateen. I read Dylan O'Brien was gonna originally play Yahya's part, and that would not have worked at all. The word unhinged gets thrown around a lot, and rarely at things that have earned it, but Gyllenhaal's performance is so bizarre it should be in the dictionary next to the word. Don't get me wrong, some of Michael Bay's annoying trademarks in editing and comedy rear their heads here, and is Bay ever excited to show off his drone shots? And on a $40 million budget, which to Bay is dreadfully cheap. It's not made with the brevity or skill as other non-stop action movies like The Raid or Hardcore Henry, as it could be 20 to 30 minutes shorter. But after a pandemic's worth of likely money laundering schemes like The Old Guard, it may as well be Die Hard. Bay might not be an auteur because of this movie, but he definitely came back to show these pansy-ass direct-to-streaming movies how you do it. 6 out of 10. HBO Max had a movie called Kimmy. It is by Steven Soderbergh, who makes a movie every 6 months. This is a very small-scale, technology-themed thriller that was kind of like Rear Window, except it's about someone who does quality assurance for an Alexa-like home assistant. For the first 2 acts, it was pretty decent in terms of production quality for a direct-to-streaming thing like this, and Zoe Kravitz was good, but there's a point where she ends up leaving her apartment, after which it started to lose me. I don't know, after that it kind of gets into this angle of like conspiracy thriller behind the company Kravitz works for, and it just runs out of steam. I guess it's cool the way this film naturally integrates COVID into the story. We're at a point where movies can easily get preachy or out of touch when they include it in an attempt to be relatable, but this movie does a pretty good job at working it in without doing any of that. Of every small streaming movie I've seen, this is radically better than basically every movie I saw last year that was a Netflix original, so maybe you'll like it, it's fine. 5 out of 10. A movie I saw that was definitely not fine was Death on the Nile. This is a spiritual sequel to Murder on the Orient Express, which I didn't see, but I did see this, and it's really bad. If you're looking for a film which updates the ensemble murder mystery genre, you're better off watching Knives Out pretty much regardless of what you're looking for. For starters, the pacing of this film is so slow. I know the excuse is the first half is dedicated to character development, so you're invested in them by the time it gets to the mystery. But is it really that, or is it that you can't fill up the bloated runtime with the mystery plotline no matter how much you draw it out? It is almost an hour before the mystery starts, and has an incredibly predictable resolution anyways. Maybe some of these twists and turns work better in a book, but in a film format, the way certain bits of information are omitted telegraph who the culprit is immediately. The acting was bad, the cinematography and editing were terrible, the casting especially seems like a step down from Orient Express. Like, I've never seen it, but the cast in that movie looks way more impressive. Letitia Wright especially was poorly suited for her role. She just looks like she knows what an iPhone is, which is not what I want out of a period piece. Gal Gadot reminded me of the 25th of April lady from Miss Congeniality, and I don't think she was supposed to. But the worst part of this film is just, it looks terrible. Why is the environmental CGI in this film worse than movies that are almost 20 years old? Why are the millions and millions of dollars going into films like this being spent on cheap star power over making the film look basically presentable? The budget of this film is $90 million, which might be on the smaller side for your typical blockbuster, but this looks like it was shot at a weather station. Knives Out had a $40 million budget, looks a million times more professional, and still had the money to cast Chris Evans and Daniel Craig. Ambulance had the same budget and looks like a movie. What the f*** happened? So the acting blows, the story was predictable and trite, and I would be embarrassed if I was given $90 million and this was the final product. This film can die. 3 out of 10. And the worst movie I saw this winter was obviously Morbius. Because what the f*** else would it be? The entire world is making fun of how bad this movie is, so good to know everyone else realizes superhero movies don't have an excuse to behave like they're opening the same weekend as Elektra anymore. There is a bottom to even the content culture-addled general audience's tolerance for bullshit nonsense. This movie opens with Jared Leto catching vampire bats on a cliff and then transitions to Greece 26 years earlier. And from there, the movie goes through every superhero movie cliche of the past 20 years, presenting them with the least imaginable amount of flavor. It is a miracle on Sony's part this level of incompetence and stupidity is still possible, because you'd think doing some follow-the-leader derivative imitation of the many great comic book movies of the past decade or so that you could use as an example, you'd think that would yield at least a watchable film. But no, within weeks of each other we got this and The Batman. The diametric opposites of superhero movies on a scale of professionalism and presentation. Cliches like the token love interest or a pair of detectives investigating the hero are conventions the writers of this movie seem aware of, but clueless as to what they're supposed to do once established. There are no characters with a remotely developed purpose besides Morbius himself and Matt Smith as the villain. And even then, that's only because we eventually have to get to the climax of two CGI characters slamming into each other as the camera whips around them so you can't see what's going on. None of the action in this film is good because, for one thing, even if Morbius slashes a dude's jugular, nary a drop of blood will be visible, as if they're trying to suck the consequence out of everything that happens. But because among Morbius's weird, confusing, and ever-changing grab bag of vampire powers is super speed, and it's visualized with awful CGI vapor trails that make it difficult to tell what's going on in the first place. The film also has terrible pretensions of making Morbius an anti-hero. They hype up his supposed insatiable lust for blood like he's a villain by pure instinct, only for that to never actually factor into the movie besides him saying it's there. They can't show a protagonist with a lust for blood actually killing people because studios are terrified of their characters doing anything that might make you not like them. And the alternative is to make them perfect, uncomplicated characters so even dipshits can be like, oh, that's the good guy. Guys, this is gonna blow your mind, but Jared Leto's performance sucked. He is never convincing as his character, and his literal cult leader ego made every line written to make him sound humble or relatable come across as though he was actively trying to be insincere. To be fair, the dialogue is very clunky and plain, but the combination with Leto's unconvincing delivery is what crosses the line to where it's actively painful. While there is plenty to hate about them, Sony's Venom movies have better structure, more entertaining characters, and hints of self-awareness. This is everything bad about Venom, with none of the aspects that made it kind of funny. It doesn't so much as move from one plot point to the next as it does tumble off a cliff and land in the Family Guy fall pose. On incredibly sparing occasions, it was kind of funny, but nowhere near enough to justify seeing this, even as a so bad it's good unintentional comedy. It is worse than every Marvel film, and even among DC's spotty resume, this is still lazier and less impactful than most of those. You have no reason to see it, nobody has any reason to see it. So don't see it. 2 out of 10. So hey, did you Morbius these films Morbius than me or Morbius than me? And anyways, if you like not only Morbius, but the way I Morbius and then Morbius, please don't hesitate to leave a Morbius or Morbius to me, Brian from the channel Morbius. Thank you, and Morbius.